The courtroom was silent except for my mother's lawyer adjusting his glasses, preparing to speak. I sat alone at the defendant's table, no attorney beside me, while my parents sat together across the aisle with 3 lawyers surrounding them like armor. Then their lead counsel stood and said the 5 words that made every head in that courtroom turn toward me with disgust. She stole $200,000. The lie hung in the air, heavy and absolute. My hands trembled under the table, but I kept my face steady because I knew something they didn't. The judge was about to ask one question, and when she did, everything my parents built would collapse in less than 60 seconds. Before I tell you what that question was, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. And if you were sitting in that courtroom facing your own family's betrayal, what would you have done? Growing up in Tacoma, I learned early that love in the Calloway family had conditions. My older brother Garrett got the encouragement, the college fund, the softness our parents reserved for their favorite child. I got the lectures, the comparisons, the quiet message that I was supposed to earn my place at the table every single day. When Garrett dropped out of his 3rd university at 24, my parents simply smiled and said he was finding himself. When I worked 2 jobs to afford community college at 19, my mother told me I should have planned better. By the time I turned 26, I'd built something they never expected. A career in medical billing, my own apartment near the waterfront, savings I'd scraped together through double shifts and sacrifice. I was finally standing on my own, and for the first time in my life, I didn't need their approval to feel whole. That's when everything shattered. It started with a phone call on a Tuesday evening. My father's voice was tight, formal, the tone he used when delivering bad news like it was a business transaction. "Margaret, we need to discuss something urgent. Can you come by the house this weekend?" I should have known then. Should have felt the trap closing. But some part of me, the part that still hoped for reconciliation, said yes. The house looked the same as it always had. Brick facade, manicured lawn, the kind of suburban perfection that hid dysfunction behind closed doors. My mother opened the front door wearing pearls and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Garrett sat in the living room, legs stretched out on the coffee table like he owned the place. He barely looked up when I walked in. My father motioned to the dining table where a stack of papers sat in a neat pile. "Sit down, Margaret. We need to talk about your grandmother's estate." My stomach dropped. My grandmother, Dorothy, had passed away 8 months earlier. She'd been the only person in the family who saw me, really saw me, not as a disappointment or a comparison, but as someone worthy of love without conditions. Before she died, she told me she'd left me something in her will. I never asked what. I just held her hand and told her I loved her. Now, sitting at that table, my father slid the papers toward me. "Your grandmother left you her property in Olympia. The house and the land. It's worth approximately $200,000. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Dorothy had left me her home, the place where I'd spent childhood summers learning to bake bread and plant tomatoes, the only place that ever felt like refuge. But my mother's voice cut through my shock like a blade. "We can't let you have it." I blinked, certain I'd misheard. "What?" Garrett leaned forward, smirking. "Mom and Dad think you'll waste it. Sell it for nothing, blow the money. They're going to contest the will." My father's expression didn't change. "It's for your own good, Margaret. You're not equipped to handle an asset of this size. We'll manage it on your behalf until you're more stable." Stable. The word tasted like acid. I'd been stable while Garrett bounced between apartments and asked them for rent money. I'd been stable while building a career they never celebrated. And now they wanted to take the one thing Dorothy had chosen to give me, the one piece of her love I could hold on to. I stood up, legs shaking. "You can't do this." My mother's face stayed calm, almost bored. "Watch us." 3 weeks later, I received the court summons. My parents had filed a legal challenge claiming I was financially irresponsible and mentally unfit to inherit. They hired not 1 but 3 attorneys, a full legal team designed to bury me under paperwork and intimidation. I couldn't afford a lawyer. Every dollar I had was tied up in rent, bills, the basics of survival. So I showed up to the preliminary hearings alone, carrying a binder of documents I'd printed at the library, hoping truth would be enough. It wasn't. The first hearing was a nightmare. Their lead attorney, a man named Philip Hargrove with silver hair and a voice like polished stone, painted me as reckless, impulsive, a risk to Dorothy's legacy. He referenced a credit card I'd opened at 21 and paid off 2 years later, calling it evidence of poor financial judgment. He mentioned the time I'd moved apartments twice in 1 year, framing it as instability instead of what it really was, escaping an unsafe living situation and finding something better. The judge, an older woman named Torres, listened without expression. At the end of the hearing, she set a trial date and told me I had 60 days to prepare my defense. 60 days to prove I deserved what my grandmother had wanted me to have. I spent those 2 months drowning. I worked my shifts at the billing office, then stayed up until 3 in the morning reading legal documents I barely understood. I taught myself about probate law, inheritance disputes, the burden of proof. My coworkers noticed the exhaustion. My friend Natalie brought me coffee one morning and whispered, "You look like you haven't slept in weeks." I hadn't. But something else was happening too. I was finding things. Old emails between my parents discussing how to divide Dorothy's estate before she'd even passed. Text messages where Garrett joked about getting his share once they dealt with me. Bank records showing my parents had taken loans against Dorothy's property while she was still alive, loans they never paid back. And then I found the voicemail. Dorothy had left it on my phone 2 months before she died, her voice soft and certain. "Margaret, honey, I'm leaving you the house. Don't let anyone tell you that you don't deserve it. You've earned every bit of love I have to give." I played that message over and over until I could recite it from memory. The courtroom on trial day was smaller than I expected. Wooden benches, fluorescent lighting, a flag hanging limp in the corner. My parents arrived with their legal team, all 3 attorneys in tailored suits carrying leather briefcases. I sat alone at my table with my binder and a notebook, feeling like I was facing an army with nothing but a slingshot. Hargrove opened with confidence. He stood before the judge and laid out his case with surgical precision. Margaret Calloway has demonstrated a consistent pattern of financial irresponsibility and emotional instability. Her late grandmother, Dorothy Calloway, was elderly and vulnerable when she made the decision to bequeath her property. We believe this decision was made under undue influence and that Margaret is unfit to manage an asset of this value. He called my mother to the stand first. She sat with perfect posture, hands folded, playing the role of concerned parent flawlessly. She described me as impulsive, secretive, someone who'd always struggled with responsibility. She mentioned the time I'd quit a job at 18 without telling them, leaving out the part where that job had an abusive manager who screamed at employees daily. She talked about how I distanced myself from the family, framing my boundaries as coldness instead of self-preservation. Then Garrett testified. He was worse. He exaggerated stories, invented details, painted me as unstable and vengeful. At one point, he claimed I'd threatened to harm myself during an argument years earlier. It was a complete fabrication, but he said it with such conviction that I saw the judge's expression shift slightly. When Hargrove finished, he turned to Judge Torres and said, "Your Honor, we believe the only responsible course of action is to place Dorothy Calloway's estate into a family trust managed by her son and daughter-in-law. This will protect the asset and ensure it benefits the entire family, not just one individual who lacks the capacity to steward it properly." The judge made a note, then looked at me. "Miss Calloway, you may present your defense." I stood, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might crack a rib. I didn't have a polished opening statement. I didn't have expert witnesses or character references lined up. All I had was the truth and the evidence I'd gathered in those sleepless weeks. I started simply. "Your Honor, my grandmother left me her property because she believed in me. Not because I manipulated her, not because I was irresponsible, but because she saw who I really was." I opened my binder and began walking through the timeline. I showed the judge my employment records, proof of steady work for the past 6 years. I showed bank statements demonstrating consistent savings and on-time bill payments. I showed the lease agreements from my apartments, each one an upgrade from the last, evidence of growth, not instability. Then I showed the emails. The ones where my parents discussed dividing Dorothy's estate before her death, treating it like an inheritance they were already entitled to. I showed the text messages where Garrett joked about getting his cut. And then I played the voicemail. Dorothy's voice filled the courtroom, warm and clear. "Margaret, honey, I'm leaving you the house. Don't let anyone tell you that you don't deserve it." The silence that followed felt sacred. My mother's face went pale. Garrett shifted in his seat. Hargrove cleared his throat and objected, claiming the voicemail was hearsay. But Judge Torres raised a hand. "I'll allow it. She's not here to testify, but her words carry weight in determining her intent." I continued. I explained that my parents had taken loans against Dorothy's property without her full understanding, that they'd been managing her finances in ways that benefited them, not her. I showed records of those loans, still unpaid, totaling nearly $50,000. And then I said the thing I'd been afraid to say out loud for years. My parents don't want this property because they care about Dorothy's legacy. They want it because they see it as money they're owed. And they're willing to destroy me in court to get it. Hargrove stood, his voice sharp. "Objection, Your Honor. This is speculation and inflammatory." Judge Torres looked at me, then at my parents, then back at Hargrove. "I'll allow the statement. It's relevant to motive." Then she did something I didn't expect. She leaned forward and looked directly at my parents. "Mr. and Mrs. Calloway, I have a question for you." The courtroom went still. "Were you aware that your mother took out a reverse mortgage on this property 3 years before her death, specifically to prevent anyone from claiming it prematurely?" My father froze. My mother's mouth opened, then closed. Hargrove shuffled papers, clearly caught off guard. The judge continued, her voice calm but cutting. "Because according to the records filed with this court, Dorothy Calloway restructured her estate to ensure it went directly to Margaret, bypassing any claims from other family members. She did this while fully competent, with the assistance of her own attorney. If you were unaware of this, then your entire case is based on assumptions. If you were aware, then you've wasted this court's time." My mother's voice cracked when she finally spoke. "We didn't know." But the way she said it, hesitant and thin, made it clear she was lying. The judge saw it too. She made a note, then turned to me. "Miss Calloway, I've reviewed the evidence you've presented. Your financial records are sound. Your grandmother's intent is clear. And frankly, the behavior of your family in this courtroom raises more questions about their motives than yours." She paused, then delivered the words that changed everything. "I'm ruling in your favor. The property transfers to you as Dorothy Calloway intended. Case dismissed." The gavel came down, a single sharp crack that echoed through the room. I stood there, frozen, unable to process what had just happened. Across the aisle, my mother stood abruptly and walked out without looking at me. Garrett followed, muttering something under his breath. My father stayed a moment longer, his face unreadable, before turning and leaving in silence. Hargrove packed his briefcase without a word. The courtroom emptied, and I was left standing alone in the space where my family had tried to erase me. But I wasn't erased. I was still here. And for the first time, I had something that was undeniably mine. The weeks after the trial felt surreal. I drove to Olympia on a Saturday morning, the keys to Dorothy's house heavy in my hand. The place looked exactly as I remembered. White paint peeling slightly around the windows, a garden overgrown but still alive, the porch where Dorothy used to sit with her coffee and watch the birds. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The air smelled like lavender and old wood, like memory itself. I walked through each room slowly, touching the walls, the furniture, the small things Dorothy had loved. In the kitchen, I found a note tucked into a recipe box. My handwriting, my name on the envelope. I opened it with shaking hands. "Margaret, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone and you're standing in the house that's now yours. I want you to know something. You were never the problem. You were always the light. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." I sat on the floor and cried for the first time since the trial. Not sad tears, but something deeper. Relief, grief, gratitude, all mixed together into something I couldn't name. I spent the next few months restoring the property. I repainted the porch, cleared the garden, fixed the leaking sink Dorothy had always meant to repair. Natalie came by on weekends to help, bringing sandwiches and laughter. Slowly, the house became mine, not just legally, but emotionally. I moved in that fall. My apartment in Tacoma felt too small, too tied to the version of myself I was trying to leave behind. Here, in Dorothy's house, I had space to breathe. Space to become who I was supposed to be all along. My parents never reached out. Not an apology, not an explanation, nothing. Garrett sent one text months later asking if I'd consider selling the house and splitting the money. I didn't respond. Some silences are answers. But my father surprised me. A year after the trial, I found an envelope in my mailbox. No return address, just my name in his handwriting. Inside was a single photograph. Me at 6 years old, sitting on Dorothy's porch, holding a jar of fireflies and grinning like the world was magic. On the back, he'd written 3 words. "I'm sorry, Margaret." It wasn't enough, but it was something. And maybe someday, that something would turn into a conversation. Or maybe it wouldn't. Either way, I wasn't waiting anymore. I wasn't hoping for them to see me. I'd already been seen, by the one person whose opinion mattered most. And she'd made sure I'd never be erased. If you've ever had to fight your own family just to claim what was rightfully yours, you're not alone. Tell me your story in the comments. I read every one. And if you don't want to miss the next story, subscribe now because the truth always finds a way to surface, even when everyone's trying to bury it. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stand alone in a courtroom and refuse to disappear.